Welcome you all to the teleconferencing session. This session is exclusively for those who are registered for the postgraduate diploma in journalism and mass communication. I will be conducting this kind of teleconferencing sessions every month, and it will broadly cover all the syllabus, and some of the sessions will be on career enhancement and counseling. Today we will introduce you to the world of journalism, and the session is titled Introduction to Journalism. And we have fortunate to have with us two eminent panelists, Professor M.R. Dua and Professor Subhash Thulia. Professor M.R. Dua is one of the pioneers in the field of journalism education in the country. He was Professor of Journalism in Indian Institute of Mass Communication for over 3 decades. Professor Dua has introduced innovation in journalism education in his capacity as course director of various training programs in the Indian Institute of Mass Communication. At present, he is a visiting professor at a number of universities that includes some university in USA. Professor Subhash Thulia is a professor of communication and head of the Department of Education, Research and Training wing of Indira Gandhi National Open University. He has 3 decades of experience both as a journalist and an academician. Professor Dua, I think as a newly inducted student of our program, they will be enthused to know about how to prepare to become a journalist. Would you like to enlighten us with your expertise?
Yeah, thank you, Rajit. To become a good journalist, most important point is that you should have an excellent language command. In order to have an excellent language command, it is necessary that you should be knowing the language in every detail. Most important point in language is how to write a sentence, how to build up ideas, and how to construct the story. In order to first write well, it is important that you must improve your language. For improvement of language, it is necessary that one should have practice of writing, and in order to write correctly and accurately, it is necessary that language should be as simple as possible, because the journalistic writing mostly are read by common people. And it is necessary that the person who is writing, he should have fairly good knowledge of grammar, of syntax and sentence construction, because unless your language is correct, unless your sentences are correct, the message will not go home. I will request Professor Thulia to add into this.
News, that means from its name itself, news is that is something new, and to identify what really is something new, the first is that we should be informed about what already is known. So we should be adequately informed about whatever is available in the public domain. And to get information, to be informed, I think the biggest challenge is you should read very, very extensively, and reading newspapers primarily. I would suggest that if there is some major event, you must read at least 3 or 4 newspapers. Take out the clippings of the report of that particular event in 3 or 4 newspapers. Read 3 or 4 reports, how different newspapers they have reported that event by adding what angle and in what perspective. Because news is something that is new information, as I told you, and second is to have a new perspective on an event. Something that you look at the event from entirely new perspective that no one has done before. And then again, to be knowledgeable is another component to become a good journalist. You must possess some knowledge, and I would suggest that to acquire knowledge, it's extremely important that you should read opinion writings. So again, I would suggest that if there's some major event, every newspaper would be offering some editorial comments, will be presenting some articles on the subject for next week or next fortnight. So you have to read editorials, because editorials in 3 or 4 newspapers would be presenting different opinion, different perspective, different point of view on that particular event. And again, number of articles would appear in the various newspapers. You have to read articles also. And opinion writings are major source of knowledge. In addition to reading newspapers, to acquire knowledge is from the books, from academic and professional journals. So they will be dealing with the contemporary trends in various issues. So apart from reading newspapers, opinion writing, you have to read magazines, you have to read professional academic journals, and you have to read books also. But
I think you mentioned about, very briefly mentioned about what are the things that a student should do. I think language is an important thing one should, language skill. Would you like to throw light upon something more about it?
yes, I think again extensively reading is very important. For journalistic writing, as Professor Dua has explained, it's very important that as a journalist you are a communicator, and as a journalist you are communicating very complex ideas to common people, and that's the art of journalism, to transform very complex ideas, very complex issues in a simple and straight language that are easily comprehended by the common people. They can understand what you are saying, and that's why you are a journalist, because you have capacity, you have language skills to present something which is very complex to very complex to those people who are very common people. Their level of knowledge, their level of understanding on that subject is not of that level that they can understand in a very technical and academic that means academic format, that you have to present information in a very simple format. And that's a test of a journalist, that how a journalist can present complex issues in such a manner that can be read by very common people. And again, another dimension is newspapers are read at a relaxed mood. No one would read newspapers by consulting a dictionary. So the choice of the words has to be very simple. So in journalism, simple sentences, spoken language is one thing, then small paragraphs is another thing, and then you should not use very complex sentences. Short sentences is another dimension. So I would sum up that there is spoken language, short sentences, and small paragraphs.
Another question that would come to the mind of me is that we are talking about media, newspaper. So we'll begin with newspaper. What would be the editorial setup of a newspaper?
You see, in a newspaper office, normally there are two main sections that concern a journalist, where journalists are involved. One is news gathering, that is reporting section, and the second is the editorial section. The main task, the primary task of a newspaper is to present the news. So therefore is a separate news reporting section. In this reporting section there are reporters and there are correspondents. You see, a newspaper has normally reporting done at three different levels. One is the local reporting, wherever the newspaper is located. For example, it is in Ranchi, or it is in Jalandhar, or it is in Trivandrum. There are local stories which have to be taken note of, and they have to be reported by the newspaper. So there is a local staff. We call them staff reporters. Then this newspaper has also to cover the state. For example, in paper is published in Kerala or in Jharkhand, it has to make sure, the newspaper has to make sure that the entire state of Jharkhand is covered, the entire state of Kerala is covered. So they have to have correspondents in different places like Kottayam, or like in Cochin, or like in Calicut. So therefore newspaper has to make arrangement to make sure that the news is gathered from different sources in the state. Then at the national level, the national level means news stories, news items, are that events which are of concern to the people, to the reader, and they come from the central government, mostly the central government, and from the visitors who are in the who are meeting the ministers, or who are conferencing with the Prime Minister or the President and talking about matters of national interest. So generally speaking, at the editorial level and reporting, in reporting there are three levels: local reporting, national reporting, local reporting, regional reporting, and national reporting. At international level, reporting is generally done by the news agencies. We have, in India we have PTI and UNI. These news agencies have correspondents in different places, in different important places. The important international news centers are London, New York, and Moscow. So the agencies have their correspondents located there who send the stories, and the newspaper pick up those stories. Some newspapers have their own correspondents based in Washington, in London, in Cairo, or in Moscow. It's very expensive to keep a correspondent at international center of news. So therefore newspapers generally are not able to support that. Then in editorial section, the editorial section is concerned with shaping the news which has to appear in the different pages. So they frame the news, they make sure that the news stories are grammatically all right, they are factually all right, and they are presented in a manner or in a position the story deserves. Sometimes there are big stories which are to be presented on the front page, and they have to be presented in a big thick letters, we call them, in double columns position or in triple column position or in 4 column, or sometimes the news stories deserve better and more display. They are presented in the form of a banner headline. It's very rare that very rare occasions the newspaper use banner headline. But normally speaking, the pages are made by the editorial department. In editorial department, you have a sub-editor, you have a senior sub-editor, then you have a chief sub-editor. Now these are the 3 or 4 persons who give shape to the news. And in every newspaper there are different shifts, because newspaper has to publish the news or has to present the news which has taken place during the last 10 or 12 or 18 hours. So therefore, the newspaper has a shift which brings out the paper, brings out the edition at a particular time. For example, I have fairly good knowledge of newspaper production. The newspaper first edition is produced at 8 o'clock, second edition is produced at 12 o'clock, and third edition is produced at sometime between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. Because these 3 editions, three different timings, are meant for the readers who are located at the distant places. So, Subhash, I believe you have worked in a newspaper office in a senior position. Probably you will be better. It will be better for you to explain in further details.
Yes, thanks, Professor Dua. Professor Dua has explained to you that how a newspaper it gets very wide range of coverage. You must be wondering that a newspaper covering a 24-hour cycle of the events, how a newspaper gets news about the local events, national events and international events. So as Professor Dua has explained, every newspaper has a wide, that means a massive, that means a huge setup of news gathering that consists of the local reporter reporting as national government, and then they have tie-up with the various news agencies, international news agencies, and that's how they get all the news about the international events. So in 24-hour cycle, a newspaper is receiving news reports every minute. Number of news reports are getting in, and then they have their own selection process, which is done by their tool desk. Obviously, because the newspaper is receiving large number of news, and then again it has to be selective in relation to its target audience, interest of its reader.
No, let me intrude here, Professor Subhash Dhulia. The point is that in process of selection the news, the editor, the sub-editor, the chief sub-editor has to use his discretion, because there are so many news stories coming into the office. The newspaper cannot use all this. There is no space to use all these stories. So they have to make a discrete selection of news stories, only those stories which are of relevance to the readers of where the paper is located.
Yes.
Otherwise, it is impossible to publish all these stories that come to the newspaper office.
Even that is one of the controversial element involved in the process of selection of news itself, because question of objectivity and all those kinds of things comes there. And regarding opinion writing, I think it is through opinion writing that an editorial policy is reflected and all these things. So Professor Dhulia would like to...
Yes, of course, in editorial writing, because opinion writing is another, that means very important stream in newspaper. Apart from the editing desk, which is responsible to bring out the editions, and then they have a news gathering wing, that means, which Professor Dwaj explained, they have that means a huge network of correspondents, stringers, local reporter, special correspondent. And apart from that, we can say the third wing is the opinion writing wing. And opinion writing wing consists of the assistant editors, some senior journalists, and their primary responsibility is to contribute editorial every day and to contribute articles. Now broadly we can say that all kind of journalistic writings, journalistic contributions are based on 3 basic elements, that is facts, analysis and opinion or comments and their views. Now an editorial in newspaper is written by either editor or his assistant editors. An editorial line means a newspaper takes editorial line. They call it editorial line. On that particular issue they have an editorial line. So apart from that, we have numerous kind of journalistic contribution, news report, features, analysis, editorials, articles, and every journalistic contribution is defined by the facts, analysis and opinion. Now broadly we can say that one extreme is a news report. news has to be primarily factual. And news is not a format, journalistic format that should consist opinion. So news are dominantly factual, based on the facts and evidences that a journalist has gathered.
You know, you would probably first remember that there is a saying called news is sacred and comment is free. You see, when we say this, news is sacred, that means the reporter has to just report the facts, and he has to be objective, he has to be accurate, and he has not to give any views in the report. The reporter has to see that all the points of the news are covered. He is not to make any comment on the story, because as Subhash said just now, for making comment it is the editorial page, and most important point about the editorial page is that it reflects the policy of the proprietor of the newspaper, and all the articles or editorial published in the editorial page are in consonance with the policy of the newspaper. Now, if you analyze or if you see the editorial page of any newspaper carefully, you will find there are at least 2 editorials, sometimes there are 3 editorials. Hindustan Times, for example, has 3 editorials. Indian Express has only 2 editorials. And other newspapers have their own content. The editorials are written by the, as Subhash said, by the assistant editors, and these assistant editors are allotted a particular subject. For example, one person writes on financial matters, another person writes on the Middle East, for example, Iraq war or Iran problems, and third person is specialist about what is happening in the Western Europe or in Soviet Union, or in Russia or in United States.
So broad area of specialization is distributed among the base assistant editors.
Yes. And then there is assistant editor. You would have noticed in the editorial page there is a column, letters to the editor. Letters to the editor of every newspaper is a very important column, because newspapers carry the views of the readers also. Because it is the readers who give their views, and it is the readers who are our customers. And if we do not give attention to the letters to the editor, the readers will even stop buying our newspapers. So therefore, letters to the editor is a very important column. I hope you agree with me.
Yes, Professor Dua. And then editorials, as Professor Dua has explained, editorials, they reflect editorial policy of a newspaper. But again, the editorial page must, that means, reflect the variety of opinion. And it is the article, that means articles do not reflect the editorial policy of a newspaper. Broadly, they will have certain amount of conformity with the broad policy parameters. But in articles, different views, different wide range of opinions are expected to be reflected. And again, as Professor Dua has explained, letters to editor are the opinions of the readers. They can agree, they can disagree with the editorial policy, with the editorials. And again, coming back to one point, that means every morning in every newspaper there is editorial conference. In that editorial conference, the various newspapers, various news reports are analyzed. And then editor, in consultation with the assistant editor, he or she identifies 3 topics. 3 topics on which they must make an editorial intervention. They must offer some kind of a views. So 3 topics are selected, and it depends, because some of the newspapers, they carry 3 editorials, and some of them only 2. So selection of the subject, and then these subjects are assigned to various assistant editors, and as has been explained, that means depending on the broad area of specialization of different assistant editors. And editorials, in a way, are written for editor. Editorials are surrogate writing. A assistant editor writing editorial is not expressing his views, his opinion, but he is expressing an opinion which has been prescribed by the editor. So at times, a assistant editor is writing an editorial, perhaps he or she may not agree with the line taken in that editorial, and that assistant editor is free to contribute an article expressing his own opinion, a dissenting opinion. That should be allowed in an ideal situation.
So permit me to say something about the editorial conference, because editorial conference is a very important function in a newspaper office. The meaning of editorial conference is that at around 11:30 or 12 o'clock every day in the morning, the newspaper editor, chief editor, assistant editor, chief reporter, special correspondents, or one of the representatives of the special correspondents sit together and analyze the stories their newspaper has published and the rival newspapers have published. And then they find out what is the story that this newspaper has missed and what is the story that other newspaper has scored over them. Then what we call is misses and scores. What newspaper has missed and other newspapers have scored over us. So we make sure that the story which the particular newspaper has missed, that story has to be covered. A follow-up exercise has to be made, and at that editorial conference it is decided what is important and who should cover what, and what kind of photographs should be published and who should bring the photograph, because photographs, we say, a photograph is worth 1,000 words. So the photographs are very important component of the newspaper editorial, not the editorial but the front page and other pages. So therefore photographer has to be educated, has to be told what kind of photograph he has to take and in what manner, from which angle, and with which news story will that photograph go. Now that story and photograph should complement one another. Otherwise that photograph will be of no use. So it is the editorial conference which is very important, and editorial conference lays out the agenda for the day. Isn't it, Swash?
Yes, yes. And generally editorials editorials appear in newspaper a day after the event has been reported. That means generally the news reports that have been published today, the editorial comments will appear tomorrow. Now the idea is first to inform the readers what has happened, what has occurred, and next day to offer the opinion. Now broadly we can say we say that news media's functions are information, education and entertainment. Now we can say that news reports, they inform the readers that what has happened, and then opinion writings, we can say that they educate. They educate people that what really are the meaning of that event, that what are the implications, what are the consequences for them, for the comment and public at large. Now that's broadly, that means we can say, that means opinion writing, they play vital role in formation of public opinion. And opinion writings are the vital inputs that might and that should influence the government policies, that should make an intervention to influence the decision making at the government level. So broadly we can say that opinion writings, they play very vital role in a democracy, and they influence the political process by creating a public opinion on certain issues.
If I could add, Subhash, in this stage, the editorial of a newspaper, if you have seen newspapers' editorial pages, an editorial does not consist more than 200 to 300 or maximum 400 words. Whereas the article, the special article, the main article appearing on the front page, on the editorial page, contains something like 1200 to 800 to 1800 to 2000 words. You should look up Times of India, for example. The editorial page articles are not very big. The limit there is 800 to 1000 words. But if you look up Hindustan Times or Indian Express, you will find the word limit is 1800 words or sometimes 2000 words. So every newspaper has its own policy. But the editorial itself should or cannot be more than 400 to 500 words. Normally speaking, since there have to be two editorials, so therefore the editorial writer has to compress all his views in 200 words or 400 words or whatever the limit is laid down, and it is the editor who has finally approves those editorials, and that's when they appear. As Subhash said, and I agree with him, the editorials contain the general line of policy taken by the proprietor, by the newspaper editor, and it is through the editor the proprietor implements his policy, and therefore the writing of editorial is absolutely it has to be absolutely in consonance with the policy of the newspaper. If a newspaper editor differs with the proprietor, he will find a lot of difficulty in functioning as the editor, because you have to carry out the policies or the agenda of the proprietor, and that is why he has started his paper. That is why he invested millions and millions of rupees in starting that paper, and there is a purpose in starting that paper, and therefore he has a purpose, and that purpose has to be implemented to the reporters, to the sub-editors, to the special correspondent, to the editor, to the assistant editor. They are all kind of an instrument in the entire exercise. When the proprietor has invested so much money, he wants some results. He expects some results. Isn't it, Subhash?
Yes, because we can say that in every news organization, or rather in every media organization, it's very important that what are the functions of editorial department, and what are the functions and in a way objectives of management, and management is controlled by the proprietors, the owners, and there is a massive capital investment in newspaper industry. Now that's a very complex relationship between owners, management and editorial department. And conventionally we said that editor is a vital link between editorial department and the management or the owners. Now he is always mediating between the two. At times there are powerful pressures from the management, from the owners, to take certain stand on certain issues. And at the same time there might be a situation where the journalist department, the editorial department is asserting a different point of view. Now editor has to strike a balance between the opinion that is being held by the owners of the management and by the editorial department. And that's very, very vital balance that an editor has to strike, because this is this balance which ultimately define that news organization is serving the owners, is serving the capital that has been invested, or news organization is broadly serving a democracy. News organization is a platform for expression of opinions. That means when we say freedom of expression, then test of the freedom of expression is whether that freedom can be exercised through news media.
And it has to be within the parameters of the policy of the newspaper. Let me add one, Subhash,
Yes.
permit me to add. You see, journalism, we have talked only about the newspaper office or the editorial work of newspaper office. When we are talking about journalism, and journalism is a vast area nowadays, and there are other areas of journalism like radio journalism, like television journalism, and public relations, and advertising, and event management. All these areas, nowadays communication research, or the research in journalistic areas has become very, very vital. You won't believe me that the newspapers are started only after surveying the market, and for surveying the market it is the journalism qualified people who are employed, who are expected to find out whether there, for example, recently, I mean a couple of years ago, a new newspaper was started in Bombay known as DNA, Daily News and Analysis. Now when they started that paper there, they found out after surveying the market that this paper has a place there. This paper has a market there. This paper will find readers there, because other newspapers were not covering the stories, or not bringing those analysis which this newspaper is doing. So therefore this newspaper has immediately, suddenly and quickly made its own place. Similarly in Delhi, for example, there was a time when we had only 2 or 3 or 4 newspapers. Now there are 12 newspapers published in English language. Each one of them has good circulation. Now, for example, a paper called Hindu Business Line. Now there was no business paper except Economic Times and Finance Express. Now there is a Business Standard. There is another newspaper. So newspapers, whenever they are started, a survey is done, a market research is done, and it is here where the management experts and the media experts are employed, and they are asked to find out what would be the scope, what would be the possibility, and what would be the market for that particular newspaper. So what maybe you can add on.
Yes, because a newspaper organization or news industry is a very big organization, and if that big organization has various kind of interest, because as has been explained, that that means massive investment that took place, and the investment is done by some big business houses. So we can broadly say that in a huge news organizations there are business interest, there are commercial interest. That means obviously the management or the owners, at the time they work to get profit from the news industry, because they have made some investment. So on the one hand, the profit is required to run the huge news organization, and on the other hand, that means those who have invested money in that, they want return on their money also. And then there are business interest, and there are the public interest also. There are the interest of the readers, and that's again, that means very, very important to maintain credibility of a news organization, that some kind of balance has to be struck between business and profit interest and the interest of the common people, the interest of the readers, and to respect the freedom of the editorial board. And because of these combinations of these factors, in recent times the journalism face is changing very, very rapidly. In last 1 decade or 15 years, journalism has changed a lot. Journalism after independence was, we can broadly say that was one phase. Pre-independence period journalism was a kind of for a mission. Most of the news organizations were working for freedom. And after independence, it was another phase, that again when there was a certain amount of idealism, but again they were a bit different. And then broadly we can say that from 70s till 90 it was a professional journalism. Professional journalism means primarily based on the objectivity, accuracy, fairness and balance. That means observing these basic principles of the journalism. And there was a great amount of autonomy to editorial department. Editor at that time, they used to be public institutions. They were big public figures. But in last 10-15 years, a great amount of commercialization of newsbeat has occurred. And because of that commercialization, a new kind of journalism is emerging. Now, I would like to know from Professor Dua that how he analyze, how we look at this changing face of the journalism.
You see, as you have rightly said, Subhash, the journalism was a mission before independence, and it suddenly turned into an industry. And as you would know, as he has said, as Subhash has said, in mission we propagate certain ideas, certain ideals, and we have some objectives to be achieved. But after you have achieved the objective, then you want to make money out of it. Now, when you are making money, sometimes you ignore this vital interest of certain sections of society because you want to make money. Now, many newspaper readers have complained that there is hardly any news, there is only advertisements and nothing else but advertisement. If you can analyze the price of one copy of a newspaper, it will run into about 500 rupees. But you are paying only 2 rupees or 3 rupees or maybe 4 rupees. Now you can imagine how is a newspaper proprietor able to sell a 40-page or 30-page newspaper for 2 rupees. Obviously he has to make money. And he has to, and nowadays, you know, with the rising prices and rising salaries and all kinds of other problems and rising cost of investment, you know, newsprint is very expensive. I remember there was in the beginning when I entered journalism, the newsprint was used to cost only $1,800 rupees per metric ton. And now it costs something like 30,000 rupees per metric ton. Now, how is the newspaper proprietor going to make up that difference? And another thing is that the journalists are now paid very good salaries. Earlier, there was a time, and I remember almost 50 years ago, I started my career at 200 rupees a month. And that princely amount of 200 rupees was considered to be a very big amount at that time. Now, no journalist starts with less than 10,000 rupees. Now, even then 10,000 rupees is considered to be a very small amount. And therefore, there is a lot of difference in salaries. So, where has all this money to come from? Moreover, the machinery that has been installed to produce a newspaper, in my times, 50 years ago, even in newspapers like Malayalam Manorama, Mathribhumi, or in Hindi Navbharat Times, or even in Urdu newspapers, or in any other language, they used to do hand composing. Then we had linos. Now we have computers. Nowadays newspapers are paperless newspapers. There is no use of paper except in printing the paper. Everything is done on computer. Now each computer costs nearly 1 lakh rupees. Makeup is done on computer, editing is done on computer, and newspaper production orders for printing are given on newspaper. Now each newspaper has several computers, and you can imagine how much the newspaper has invested, how much money has gone into purchasing those newspaper and making those computers to work all efficiently and effectively. Similarly, printing machinery, for example, is also very expensive, and almost all the newspapers have imported machineries from foreign countries, and we have to pay in dollars. You know, we have to pay in foreign exchange. So therefore, there is a lot of investment in the newspapers, and therefore the idea is that nowadays the newspapers are driven by an idea of providing the news, providing the entertainment, and nothing more than that. Then they carry advertisement, because they have to survive. And to survive for a newspaper is a very big question. Believe me, they have to struggle very hard to survive. There are certain newspapers, and let me tell you here, according to the Registrar of Newspapers of India, there are about 45,000 newspapers in this country. 45,000 newspapers, and the growth rate of newspaper industry is about 5%. And at the same time, according to Registrar of Newspapers, the mortality rate of newspaper is about 8%. So 5% newspapers are started and 8% of them die. Why do they die? Why do they become dysfunctional? Why do they become disbanded? Because there are no advertisement. They cannot survive on selling the copies only. So the price of a newspaper copy is only 2 rupees and 3 rupees, as I said. Unless the newspaper gets advertisements, and for getting advertisements, the newspaper has to follow its own policy, and it has to in fact support certain ideologies, political ideologies or commercial ideologies, so that those persons or those political parties or those proprietors or those industries give advertisement to the newspapers and they are able to survive. I think that's what
well, I think that's very, very important, that the communication revolution, the emergence of new technology, it has changed the face of the journalism as it exists today. And the entire newspaper is produced, is online. It's heavily based on technology. And now it is said that in news organizations, the paper and pen has disappeared. Now every journalist is working on computer. And again, this is a vital area, that to become a good journalist, you must be computer literate.
Yes.
You should learn typing. That means you should be able, if you are working in English or in any other Indian languages, because in Indian languages perhaps the typing is a little bit complex. So you must excel in typing, because to achieve computer literacy, I think that the first step is to be proficient in typing, and to be well equipped with that, means the basic functions of a computer. At least you should be able to write your report articles on computer. That's one very, very important dimension to become a good journalist. So that means typing skills and to work on computer, the basic computer skills. And again, it has been mentioned that the advertising industry is playing very, very vital role in influencing the content of a newspaper. So as Professor Dua explained, that a newspaper running into 30, 40 or 50 pages, the cost of production might be 30, 40 rupees, but still you are getting that newspaper for 2 or 3 rupees. Now entire deficit is being compensated by advertising industry, and once advertising industry has so much backing of a news organization, obviously they have some say or vital say in the content also. Advertising industry would not like certain amount or certain kind of a content. And then again, advertising industry is meant for the additional purchasing power segment of the society, because a newspaper or a news product which is being sold among affluent sections of the society definitely would attract more advertisement. So that's another, that means area, that means the emergence of advertising industry and its impact on the newspaper content. And again, as we discussed, that means that journalism in our country has moved from advocacy journalism. During independence struggle, we were advocating a cause, and after advocacy journalism, then we shifted to professional journalism. And we can broadly say that today, that means the impact of business is great on the editorial content. Certain amount of commercialization of news media has occurred. When we say that news industry is a profit-making industry, news is a product like any other consumer product, and a reader is a consumer. So there is a shift from a newspaper being a public service, a news product being a kind of a social product, and reader being a reader, a citizen. Now it has shifted to newspaper as a business, news as a product, and reader as a consumer. So that's a major shift, and that shift is influencing our journalism also. Today the journalism is totally different what is used to be, say, 15 years back, or maybe 20 years back or 30 years back. Today a new kind of a journalism has emerged, which is by and large driven by profit motive, driven by commercial consideration.
So I have a question, like when Professor Dua has mentioned that news is sacred and comment is free, in such a commercial environment, what will be, you have to redefine news, or what will be the comment on that?
Yes, you are absolutely right. We have to define news, because you see, it's an important point to know for all of us. Newspaper is being covered every hour, every day. There are news channels which are covering the news 24 hours. There are radio news every hour. And then you see, we get news from various other sources. So the problem of the newspaper becomes very difficult, because it is writing the news, it is publishing the news which the readers already know. This is the most important point. So therefore, the reader wants to know something more, something better, something in detail. So the task of the reporter, a task of the newspaper becomes more complicated and more difficult. And in order to meet the circulation, in order to meet the expectations of the reader, the newspaper proprietor, the newspaper reporters, the newspaper entire editorial staff has to work in an extraordinary manner, so that they meet the needs of the reporter, they meet the needs of the reader. Reader is the final authority. Reader is the final judge of the product that you present to him day in and day out, because he knows the news already. He has already come to know from radio or from television what has taken place. So the reader is now expecting more details, greater details, maybe sometimes even comment in the story itself.
More in-depth report.
In-depth reporting, right. Nowadays it is said that a news story, it is not only news but it is also views. The story covers the news as well as the news, and the reporter has to do this. It is the task of the reporter, it is the task of the correspondent to do it. Until and unless this is done, the newspaper will not sell in the market. Because, as I said, the most important point is the reader knows the news. What he knows.
24-hour news channels are already
Yes.
channels are already informing that what has occurred.
Yes.
Yes.
So
and
therefore,
newspapers. Yes.
so
That's, yeah. That's
therefore,
another, I think, important
Yes.
that the print journalism has undergone a great, that means transformation, because 24-hour news channel, they inform the general audiences that what has occurred. So people are already informed that what has happened, and then that's why newspapers, they have to go for more analytical, more in-depth reporting.
I think it was indeed a very invigorating session. I thank Professor Dua and Professor Subhash Dhulia for his comments. I hope students might have, those who have watched the program might have got a basic idea about journalism. I wish you all the best, and wish you all a happy self-learning experience. Thank you.
Thank you.